on the American consumer. Mr. President, I yield the floor. And I'd suggest the absence of quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
The Senate back in a quorum call. We're waiting for a senator to come to the floor and speak. Live coverage of the Senate here on C-SPAN 2 continues. This week, the Senate working on ENDA, the Employment Non-Discrimination Act, protecting workers in certain gender and sexual groups from discrimination. Debate and votes on amendments could occur today, with final passage expected later this week. Right now on C-SPAN, hearing live, Senate Homeland Security Subcommittee examining Hurricane Sandy recovery efforts. Again, that got underway about an hour or so ago, and that continues live right now on C-SPAN. Later on C-SPAN at 8 o'clock this evening, we'll re-air testimony by Health and Human Services Secretary Kathleen Sebelius. She appeared before the Senate Finance Committee earlier today on the rollout of the nation's health care law and problems with the website healthcare.gov. Again, that's coming up tonight, 8 Eastern on C-SPAN. Here on C-SPAN 2, the Senate continues with a quorum call underway as we wait for a senator to come to the floor.
Mr. President.
The senator from Minnesota.
Mr. President, are we in a quorum call?
We are.
I ask the quorum call be vitiated.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I come to the floor today in support of the Employment Non-Discrimination Act, also known as ENDA. For my state, it has been quite a year for equality, Mr. President. Last November, we were the first state in the country to defeat a constitutional amendment banning marriage equality. Up to that point, those amendments had passed. And then, just a few months later, earlier this year, Minnesota became the 12th state to allow full marriage equality, the 12th state in the country. I'm proud to represent our state. They have been a true civil rights pioneer. You go back to the days of Hubert Humphrey, who once stood on this floor, his speech to the 1948 Democratic Convention, where he talked about standing up for the people of this country, standing up for people with disabilities, standing up for the most vulnerable. That's the history of our state. Before striking down the amendment banning marriage equality, Minnesota was one of the very first states to ban discrimination based on both sexual orientation and gender identity. That happened back in 1993. And I would say, Mr. President, that 20 years later, it's time for the rest of the country to catch up. That's not to say the country hasn't made great strides toward fairness and equality. I'm proud of our progress. Through the Matthew Shepard's and James Byrd Jr. Hate Crimes Prevention Act, we've made it a federal crime to assault someone because of their sexual orientation or gender identity. It wasn't that long ago that we were debating the Matthew Shepard bill on this floor. You weren't even there yet, Mr. President, in the Senate, but I remember that we had to do that debate several times through many years, and that we came close so many times, and finally were able to pass it. That was actually about hate crimes and assault, and the fact we've now reached this level where we're talking about the Employment Non-Discrimination Act is truly a tribute to change in this country, to the people of this country pushing for change. After the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, our gay and lesbian service members who serve this nation with honor and distinction can serve openly. That's something else that happened in this chamber, something else that someone predicted would never happen. And just this year, the Supreme Court took a major step toward marriage equality by striking down key parts of the Defense of Marriage Act. But there's more to be done in our nation's pursuit of equality. The rest of DOMA needs to be eliminated, and that's why I'm a co-sponsor of S1236, the Respect for Marriage Act. Federal benefits need to be guaranteed for domestic partners of federal employees in states that haven't yet adopted marriage equality, like my state of Minnesota, and that's why I'm a co-sponsor of S1529, the Domestic Partner Benefit and Obligations Act of 2013. And as we discuss policies affecting LGBT Americans, we also need better data. We need to better understand the disparities people experience because of their sexual orientation and gender identity. That's why I'm working to strengthen our data collection in these areas. And of course, the topic before us today, we need to pass ENDA. The bill before the Senate would be a major step forward for equality. I urge my colleagues to support the Employment Non-Discrimination Act because protections against discrimination in the workplace need to be extended to all Americans, no matter their gender identity or sexual orientation. Americans have many different views on sexual orientation and gender identity, but I think we can all agree every person deserves to be treated with dignity in the workplace. In 29 states across the country, it is still legal to fire someone based on their sexual orientation. In 29 states, it is still legal to fire someone because they are gay. And currently, there is no federal law prohibiting this from happening. That is why we need ENDA and why I'm a proud co-sponsor of this bill. The Employment Non-Discrimination Act will provide basic and necessary protections against workplace discrimination. Protections just like the one that we've had in place in Minnesota since 1993. ENDA will allow all Americans to earn a living without fear that who they are or who they love would cost them their job. The law is not intended to give anyone any special treatment. It simply extends federal employment discrimination protections like the ones currently provided based on race or religion, applying those now to sexual orientation and gender identity. The American people are coming together behind this measure. More than 2/3 of people in this country, Democrats and Republicans alike, support a federal law protecting LGBT individuals from discrimination in the workplace. The bill has the support of over 200 civil rights, religious, labor, and women's organizations. It upholds and protects religious liberty by exempting houses of worship and religiously affiliated organizations. Companies and businesses, big and small, know that discrimination in the workplace hurts their bottom line. That's why, as the Senate chair of the Joint Economic Committee, I released a fact sheet on the economic consequences of workplace discrimination. It's easy to see, Mr. President, why businesses are on the side of equality. A majority of the top 50 Fortune 500 companies say pro-diversity policies increase profitability. We certainly saw that in Minnesota, where General Mills, a major company, came out this last year as a company, their CEO, against the constitutional amendment that would have banned marriage equality. The CEO of St. Jude, that company did the same thing. Carlson Companies, Radisson Hotels, they did the same thing. You could go through a number of large businesses in our state that said no to discrimination and yes to equality. Now, why did they do that? Well, I think many of them felt it was the morally right thing to do, but the other reason they did it, it was good for business. One poll found that 63% of small businesses support greater legal protections for LGBT workers. And workplace discrimination, as we know, diminishes workforce morale, lowers productivity, and increases costs due to employee turnover. In our state, we want to attract the best workers. And if you cut off a whole bunch of workers and tell them, you know, this isn't really a good place to be because we won't let you get married or we're going to discriminate against you, it ends up hurting that state. And the same as we look at the global economy is true of the world. We want to be a country that welcomes people of all races to our country. We want to be a country that welcomes people of all religions, and we want to be a country that welcomes people, different sexual orientations. That cannot be a barrier to entry in our country, and that is another reason, as we look at why this bill is so important, why it is important to business, why it is important to our economy, that we need to get this bill passed. When you treat people fairly, and you focus on keeping and getting the best people, it is good for the bottom line. The diverse coalition coming together in support of this bill reminds me of the people who came together in our state to defeat that divisive marriage amendment and to enact marriage equality. By bringing together civil rights organizations, religious groups, businesses, and Americans from across the nations, Republicans, Democrats, and independents, we sent a clear message. Support fairness, support equality. I hope my Senate colleagues will join me in supporting this important legislation, just as 61 of us did on the vote on Monday evening. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor. I note the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
Mr. President.
The senior senator from Alaska is recognized.
Mr. President, request that proceedings under the quorum call be suspended.
The objection so ordered.
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to follow my friend and my colleague from Minnesota here in explaining why I, too, support the Employment Non-Discrimination Act, known as ENDA. As she has very well articulated, the notion somehow or other discrimination of any kind against anybody should be allowed in our workplaces is something that I would hope that we would be able to come together on a bipartisan basis from all corners of the country and recognize this is not an acceptable direction. This is not a place or a process that we would endorse. As we all know, current law protects against discrimination in the workplace for many classes of individuals. Many of us have been involved in working to refine these laws that protect against discrimination. Discrimination that affects employment practices not on the basis of one's merits or qualifications, but on the sole basis of factors unrelated to an individual's work experience, such as race, ethnicity, national origin, religion, age, disability, and sex or gender. So we have made sure to put in place these protections against discrimination in the workplace for these classes, these categories of individuals. Those in the LGBT community for whom discrimination on the basis of sex does not apply. So what ENDA does is it bridges that gap. And it is time that that gap is resolved. In fact, that separation that has been in place is eliminated. Discrimination should never be tolerated in any workplace. Just should not be tolerated in any workplace, or really anywhere for that matter. It's just pretty simple. Just no discrimination. I am a strong believer that individuals should be judged on their merits and not how they look or how they are perceived to be. Folks look at Alaska sometimes through a different lens. They think you're kind of out of sight, out of mind up north. Small population. We just have a little over 700,000 people. But our communities across the state host a very significant LGBT community. By some estimates, in the three largest cities, Anchorage, Fairbanks, and Juneau, we're told that we rank in the top half of cities around the country with 50 or more sex couples. So in the population centers in Alaska, we have what I would describe for a state with small population, a very significant and an important part of our community, because the contributions that come to our community because of those within the LGBT community make us, quite honestly, a better place to live and work and raise your family. And I believe that strongly. We have pretty mixed population. A lot of people don't recognize or don't think about our ethnic diversity up north. We actually have the most ethnically diverse neighborhood in the United States of America is in my hometown of Anchorage, in the neighborhood of Mountain View. The elementary school where my kids spent their early years, there were over 50 languages that were the home languages of the students in that neighborhood school. It's a pretty diverse community. It's a very rich community because of our diversity. And part of that diversity is what comes to us through the LGBT community. And they are white, they are black, they're Hispanic, they're Asian, they're Native, they're urban, they're rural. They are active military and our veteran population. They're young, they're old. They are very involved and very engaged in our workforce. It was just several weeks ago in Anchorage, our largest community, where the Anchorage Chamber of Commerce hosted the National LGBT Chamber of Commerce, hosted their president in in Anchorage for their their weekly chamber presentation. And for our community's chamber, it was an interesting enough speaker that the local newspaper actually did an advance story about it. And there were some who were a little anxious and concerned that perhaps this would bring out some aspects of the community that would say we don't want to see discrimination end in our workplace. We don't want to be welcoming of our LGBT community. As it turned out, it was exactly the opposite. The reception at that chamber meeting was one of inclusion and one of a desire to truly embrace the economic opportunities that come with a community that embraces all peoples, all genders, and truly all Americans. When we were approaching the hearing, or the markup actually, in the Health, Education, Labor, Pensions Committee, where we were to have the ENDA bill before our committee, I had a considerable outflow of support, communications from constituents all over the state. They shared their stories of employment discrimination for a host of different reasons. They were told that they were discriminated because they were too gay. They were discriminated because they were too feminine or too masculine for their place of employment. And in terms of the outcry from constituents in saying, please finally address this. Please ensure that in our workplaces there is no discrimination. There is not only a friendly workplace, but a workplace where we are free from any form of retaliation. Now, like any proposed legislation that affects employers and employees alike, I believe that we have to find appropriate balance. And you have to strike that between protecting employees against discrimination in the workplace and making sure that employers are not unduly burdened with compliance costs. I think we recognize that. We've got to find this appropriate balance among legal remedies and redress. I am pleased that the Senate has adopted Senator Portman's amendment today, which I have supported, that protects religious employers from retaliation by the government when they adhere to their religious convictions, and then also that clarifies the importance of protecting religious freedom as part of ENDA. I think that that is an improvement to the bill, and I'm pleased that we have been able to advance that. I want to recognize Senator Merkley for his leadership on this issue. I think from the very time he came here to the United States Senate, he has approached me in discussion about advancing the ENDA legislation, ensuring that from the perspective of our workplaces that there is full equality, that there is no discrimination within the workplace. And Senator Kirk for his leadership in this initiative as well. I'm pleased that we're going to have an opportunity tomorrow to hopefully advance this bill fully and finally through the floor of the United States Senate. It is well past time that we as elected representatives, in ensuring that our laws protect against discrimination in the workplace for all individuals, that we ensure those same protections for those within the LGBT community. So I look forward to the vote tomorrow and hope that there is strong support for ensuring a level of fairness throughout our workplaces in this nation. And with that, Mr. President, I would yield the floor.
President.
The senior senator from Maine is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I just want to rise to thank the senator from Alaska for her powerful endorsement of this bill. She is a member of the Health Committee, and along with Senator Mark Kirk and Orrin Hatch, she led the Republican support for this bill when it was being considered by the Health Committee. I believe that the senator from Alaska did an extraordinary job of outlining why this bill should pass, why it must pass. It is a matter of fairness, and it is a matter of demonstrating that there's simply no place in the workplace for discrimination. It is significant, Mr. President, that most of our large businesses and many of our smaller ones have voluntarily adopted anti-discrimination policies. They have done so because they want to attract and to retain the best, brightest employees that they can find. They know that sexual orientation and gender identity are irrelevant to an individual's ability to do a good job. What counts are qualifications, skills, hard work, and job performance. And the legislation that I'm very hopeful that we will pass tomorrow will help ensure that that is the focus in workplaces throughout America. As the senator from Alaska has pointed out, however, we were also very careful to respect religious freedom and liberty in this bill. And I agree with her assessment that the amendment offered by Senator Portman and his colleagues helps strengthen that part of the bill by prohibiting any retaliation against a religious organization or employer who legitimately qualifies for an exemption under ENDA, and we want to make sure that those employers receive and are able to compete for federal grants and contracts, just as those employers and businesses that are not exempt under this bill can compete for federal contracts and grants. So I believe the Portman language does strengthen the bill. I hope, Mr. President, that we are on the verge of making history tomorrow by passing this bill with a strong vote. I then hope that our colleagues on the House side will follow suit and that we can see this bill signed into law. But again, my purpose in rising once again today is to thank the senator from Alaska for her strong support and for making a very powerful argument for sharing the experience in her state. And I'm sure that her words help reinforce the support for this highly significant legislation. Thank you, Mr. President.
Mr. President.
Senator from Minnesota is recognized.
Mr. President, I also wanted to thank the senators that are gathered here today for their stalwart support for this bill. Senator Merkley, who, as Senator Murkowski mentioned, has been there from the day he got to the Senate and actually would be working on this issue before when he was in Oregon. And also Senator Collins for working with Senator Kirk, leadership and courage she's shown on nearly every issue that's come before this chamber, and then Senator Murkowski. I just love that you can talk about Alaska's sense of independence and their belief that you treat people well and you don't discriminate against them, and just the picture of you in your neighborhood with all of the diversity that I think a lot of people in other states don't expect of Alaska, but anyone that has visited there sees firsthand. I also wanted to mention, since you brought up Senator Portman's amendment today, which is a good amendment, I was going through my Twitter feed, being the presiding officer, being the other senator, the senior senator from Ohio. But I was going through my Twitter feed a little bored watching the election coverage last night and came across a tweet from Senator Portman's son, Will, who is in college. And the tweet talked about his dad's vote on ENDA, and it said, "Way to go, Dad." So I would just urge my colleagues, for anyone that wants to get a tweet from their own kids or nieces or nephews or grandkids who seem to understand this a little more quickly than some of our members here, how important it is to treat people fairly, that they too, if they vote with us, can get a tweet from some young person that says, "Way to go, Senator." Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
Mr. President,
Senior Senator from Maine is recognized.
I suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk, call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
Mr. President.
Senior Senator from Oregon is recognized.
Mr. President, I ask that the quorum call be...
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you so much. I want to take the opportunity to say a word or two. While our colleagues from Alaska and Maine are here, these two colleagues representing the far northwest and far northeast of the United States have brought so much wisdom and so much determination to this topic of treating all citizens with respect, providing all citizens with the full measure of liberty to be deeply engaged in every aspect of American life, and that certainly includes the workplace. And that topic, ending discrimination in the workplace, is before us today. Senator Collins was the chief Republican sponsor for the first 2 years that I was in the Senate. She passed on the baton to Senator Kirk, but did not stop championing this bill. And late last night was working on this and has been holding meetings many days in the weeks that have led up to this moment and over the years that have led up to this moment. And so thank you very much to the senior senator from Maine for your engagement and advocacy of fairness for all Americans. And my colleague from Alaska, it was a pleasure to exchange voicemails as we prepared for the Monday night, and knowing that she wouldn't be able to be here for that vote, but was sending good wishes, and we were uncertain whether we would have 60 votes that night, or whether we would have the floor open to midnight, or whether we would be voting the next day in order to have her support be the support that put us over the top. But long before that vote occurred, she too has been talking to her colleagues, noting that freedom for American citizens means freedom to pursue your mission in life, your meaning in life through your work, and that discrimination in the workplace diminishes the individual, but diminishes the full potential of our nation as well. So we are now all hoping that we will be able to have final votes on amendments and votes to close debate and to have a final vote sometime tomorrow. That work is not yet done. The path before us may still have unexpected challenges to be overcome, but as we overcome them and approach that final vote, it will be in large measure because of the terrific work of these two colleagues. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senior Senator from Delaware is recognized.
Good afternoon, Mr. President, my colleague from Oregon. Mr. President, my wife ran into one of our old colleagues the other day, a guy named Ted Kaufman. Remember him? Sure we do. Ted was the interim senator here for 2 years. He succeeded Joe Biden and held down that slot for 2 years until Senator Chris Coons was elected on his own not that long ago. One of the things that I loved about Ted, he would every month he would come to the floor and he would talk about a different federal employee. And sometimes I've heard our colleagues, I hear other people talk about federal employees or state and local employees as nameless, faceless bureaucrats, and in a derisive way, unflattering, uncomplimentary, and I suspect dispiriting. And the folks who serve in federal government or state and local government do so usually not because it pays a lot of money, because they get huge bouquets and a lot of credit. They just want to do something constructive with their lives. But Ted used to do that every month when he'd come to the floor. This is like a shout out to him because I heard about a fellow in Delaware who's decided to step down after a great career, public service. And I want to take just a few minutes, if I could, to talk about him. The person I have in mind today is the fellow who is stepping down as the director of our Delaware Division of Parks and Recreation. His name's Charles A. Salkin, and we call him Chaz, C-H-A-Z-Z, Chaz. And he was appointed director of the division a couple months before I became governor. He was appointed in June 1 of 1992. He continued to serve with distinction in that capacity, leading the Division of Parks and Recreation for the 8 years that I served as governor. And then he went on to serve for 2 other governors after me. So he served a Republican governor, Mike Castle, before me, in a Democratic administration, and so a total of 4 governors. That doesn't happen every day in every state. And when you get those kinds of opportunities, it must mean you're pretty good. In his case, he was very good. But he's now retiring from the post after more than 35 years of service to the people of our state. And for over 3 decades, he's been a tremendous leader and a real advocate for the educational, for the mental, for the physical benefits of state parks. He's also a devoted husband to his wife of 40 years, a woman named Sue, who's very accomplished in her own right. And she's just recently retired as deputy director of the Delaware Division of the Arts. They have a daughter, Emily, who's now, I believe, grown, and so they kind of interesting to see where they pull up their anchors and sail off into the sunrise. But for Chaz and Sue, we thank them both for great service to the people of our state, and wish them and Emily well. Their hard work and creativity and dedication are going to be missed a whole lot, and we'll remember for many years the many contributions that they've made. But since 1978, Chaz has played an active role in the expansion and the preservation of Delaware's open space areas and the development of programs that introduce Delawareans and visitors of all ages to the historical and recreational benefits of our state parks. And as he steps down from the position as director of Delaware Division of Parks and Recreation, we give him our sincere thanks, and we want to thank his staff too for their diligent and long-standing efforts to maintain a reputation as having one of the most dynamic and innovative park systems in the nation. Throughout his career, Chaz has been a visionary whose creativity and forward-thinking have changed the very nature of our state park systems. From the institution of zip lines to kayak rentals, Chaz has done a tremendous job of inspiring a love of nature in just about all Delawareans. He's played an important role in securing Delaware's footprint in the national park system with the recent naming of the first state national monument. Delaware was the first state to ratify the Constitution. William Penn came to America through Delaware. One of the oldest houses in all of North America is in Lewis, Delaware, sort of a byproduct of the early Dutch settlement some 375 years ago. We're the first state to ratify the Constitution. We've done all kinds of, a lot of firsts in a little state, but we don't have a national park, and we've been working on it for a number of years, and Chaz and now Chris Coons and John Carney over in the House have taken up the mantle. We have a first state national monument. We're grateful for that. Thank you, Mr. President. Vice President Biden. Still knocking on the door for a national park, and Chaz and his people have been terrific laborers with us in that effort. But Chaz's research, his professional leadership, his personal membership in all kinds of organizations like the National Association of State Park Directors and the National Association of State Outdoor Recreation Liaison Officers have also supported Delaware's natural resources and emphasized our state parks' value to Delaware's financial successes. Places like Oregon, Senator Merkley and presiding officer from Ohio, Senator Collins, who's still on the floor, all your states have wonderful national parks. And as it turns out, the top destination, the top tourist destination for people who come to the United States from other countries is our national parks. And we don't have one in Delaware. We want one. But in the meantime, our state parks have sort of filled the gap, and we have some state parks we're real proud of. And one of the guys who's worked very hard to make them something we can be proud of is Chaz Hawken. He has undoubtedly left a legacy of achievement, persistence, and passion with the members of the Parks and Recreation team that have included hundreds of people over the age of 35, that have included hundreds of people over the past 35 years. And we in the state of Delaware are truly grateful for everything Chaz has done to protect and preserve our state's beauty and history. On behalf of Senator Chris Coons, my colleague here, our colleague here in the Senate, on behalf of John Carney, our lone congressman over in the House, and we wholeheartedly thank Chaz for 35 years of service to the state of Delaware. His model leadership, his dedication has improved the quality of life for residents and for visitors who come to our state from all over the world. And we offer our sincere congratulations on a job well done. I wish him and Sue and their family many happy, successful years to come. One of the things that Chaz has done is
for unanimous consent request.
I'm sorry?
Would my friend yield for unanimous consent
I'd be happy to yield.
The leader is recognized.
Mr. President, I appreciate my friend from Delaware's courtesy. He and I have been together for 31 years. And I also appreciate I wanted to make sure that Senator Collins was on the floor when I did this. Mr. President, I withdraw my motion to proceed to calendar number 236, H.R. 3204.
The motion is withdrawn.
Could I ask the Chair what the pending business now is before the body?
S. 815 is now the pending question.
That's what I thought. I have a cloture motion at the desk.
Clerk will report.
Does she have it? It's probably buried in some of that stuff up there. Or maybe you don't have it. Cloture motion at the desk.
Now the clerk will report the cloture motion.
Cloture motion. We, the undersigned senators, in accordance with the provisions of Rule 22 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, hereby move to a close a debate on S. 815, a bill to prohibit employment discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation or gender identity, signed by 18 senators as follows.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the names not be read.
Without objection, so ordered.
I'm sorry.
Majority Leader will proceed.
I want the record to reflect also that Senator Jeff Merkley is on the floor, who's been instrumental in allowing us to get to the point where we are on this bill. I ask consent the mandatory quorum under Rule 22 be waived.
Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that at 11:45 a.m. Thursday, November 7th, the motion to recommit and the pending amendments to the underlying bill be withdrawn, that the read of Nevada Amendment 2020 be withdrawn, that no further amendments, motions to recommit or points of order be in order, that the Senate then proceed to vote in relation to the pending Toomey Amendment, that the Toomey Amendment be subject to a 60 affirmative vote threshold, that upon disposition of the Toomey Amendment, substitute amendment as amendment be agreed to, that the Senate then proceed to vote on the motion and vote cloture on S. 815 as amended. If cloture is invoked, the time until 2 p.m. And the time until 1:45 p.m. be equally divided between the two leaders or the designees, that at 1:45 p.m. all post-cloture time be yielded back and the bill be read a third time, and the Senate proceed to vote and passage the bill as amended. Finally, if cloture is not invoked, I be recognized.
Is there objection? So ordered.
Mr. President, I appreciate everyone's cooperation. This is how we should legislate. Work together. This is something we've done together, and I appreciate everyone's work on this. It's not been easy for anyone. Not everybody's satisfied, but a lot of people are satisfied. I now ask unanimous consent that we proceed now to approve morning business. Senators allowed to speak for up to 10 minutes each until 7 p.m. tonight.
Is there objection? So ordered.
Mr. President.
Senior Senator from Delaware is recognized.
If I could just conclude, and I'd ask unanimous consent to my remarks appear in the record.
Without objection, so ordered.
There is no interruption. We struggled, the federal government, to pay for things. We struggled at state levels to have the revenues to pay for the kinds of services that our citizens want. One of the things I especially admired in the work done by Chad Salkin is a growing reliance over time to invite people, could be young people, could be older people, could be retired, maybe not, could be students, could be senior citizens, but people who would like to volunteer some of their time to help in our national parks. And it'd be interesting to be able to kind of look at the number of volunteer hours that we've amassed or been amassed over the years in service in our national parks and compare that on a per capita basis to the rest of the country. But I think we probably stack up pretty well. In a day and age when we want to stretch every dollar for as far as we can, one of the things we've done in our state, in no small part because of Chaz's leadership, is to invite volunteers to come in, to help out, to make our parks better than they ever were before, and to benefit from that by feeling they've helped us to accomplish something really good for now and for a long time into the future. And with that, Mr. President, I yield back my time. And unless the gentlewoman from Maine is going to ask for to be recognized on the floor, I'm going to make just note the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
The Senior Senator from Maine.
I ask unanimous consent that proceedings under the call be dispensed with.
Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. President, before the senator from Oregon leaves the floor, I just want to thank him for his leadership on this bill. He did pick up the mantle from our dear late colleague, Senator Ted Kennedy. He had worked on this issue in his home state, Senator Merkley had, before coming to the Senate. And we have worked very closely together as this bill has been on the floor. He's been very fair and open-minded, and although we were not able to work out agreements on everything as I would have hoped, I do believe that there was a good faith effort that was evident in the passage of Senator Portman's amendment, and I'm really excited that tomorrow we will be reaching final passage, and the Senator Merkley deserves an enormous amount of credit for his leadership. So I just wanted to thank him while he was still present on the floor, and to also tell him how much I appreciated his kind words earlier today. Thank you, Mr. President. And, Mr. President, I would suggest the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
senior senator from Maine is recognized.
Mr. President, I ask that proceedings under the call be vitiated.
No objection. So ordered.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, tomorrow we will take a vote